In this video, I will show you how to use Adobe Animate at a very basic level. Adobe Animate is one of the most powerful and professional of the tools that we'll be looking at in this course. And it's going to look a little intimidating, but I want to just tell you, don't get intimidated, don't be worried. I'm going to walk you through how to create a very simple animated project using Adobe Animate. So here I am in Adobe Creative Cloud, and I'm on a Mac computer, but it basically looks very similar on a Windows computer. In a previous week of the course, I showed you how to use Adobe Creative Cloud to quickly jump to Adobe Express by pressing this button. And Adobe Express is an online tool. But other than Adobe Express, almost everything else in Adobe Creative Cloud is not an online tool. It's not web-based. Almost everything else needs to be installed on your computer in order to really use it. And you can see here, when I click on All Apps, it shows me a list of my Adobe apps that are currently installed on my computer. One of them is Adobe Animate, and I can click this button to open it and begin using it. For you, it may not be there in your list of installed apps. So you may need to go up here to the top, click to search Adobe Creative Cloud, just search for Animate, there it is, and click on it to then install it. Because I already have Animate installed, it opened it up. I'm going to go back just to show you how it works if the app is not already installed. So if I click here on Photoshop, for example, Photoshop is not currently installed on this computer. It takes me to a page about Photoshop so that I can learn all about it. And then I can just choose the version of Photoshop that I want to install and click Install. Once it's finished that process, if I go back using this back arrow and click on All Apps, it will show Adobe Photoshop in my list of installed apps, and I'll be able to click to open it and use it. For now though, I'm just going to open Adobe Animate, and it takes me to this screen. It's a welcome screen, and it's encouraging me to try a tutorial to help me learn more about Adobe Animate. And later in this course, you'll need to choose one of these tutorials and complete it. But for now, let's click Skip, and we're presented with a menu of project types that we could quickly begin creating. You can see it says Start a New File Fast, and there are other presets that you can explore here. If you want almost the full list, you can click here on Create New, and that's what I'm going to do. So I click on Create New. There's several different types of presets that you can look through. I'm going to stick with Education for now, and then I can select a high resolution preset, low resolution, medium, very high, and there's other options as well. I'm going to stick with high at this point. You can see some details here about the height and width, the frame rate, etc. But I'll just go ahead and click Create, and I'm given a canvas with which to work. Underneath that, I have a timeline. Now at this point, I don't see much on the timeline. That's because the Output tab is selected, but I'm going to click back on Timeline. And so here, with this white rectangle, I get to see a glimpse of what the project is looking like as I work. And then down here below, I have a timeline with layers, and we start with one layer. You can see there's a 5 and a 10 and a 15 and a 40 and a 45. And for this tutorial, we're not going to do anything very complicated. I would just like to create an animation of a ball that enters this screen and then bounces and then exits the screen. And then I'd like some text to appear. Now, if you can do this, you can create all sorts of educational animations using Adobe Animate. So I want to challenge you to be thinking about how you could apply this to education. So I'm using this slider just to slide over here to the left because I want the ball that I'm about to create to start here off screen. And you'll notice here at the left, we have some tools that we can pick up and then set down again. So right now I have my selection tool picked up or selected, but I'm going to set it down by selecting this rectangle tool. This enables me to create rectangles, but in this case, I'm going to undo that by holding Command or Control on a Windows computer and tapping Z to undo it. Because I don't actually want a rectangle, I want a circle. So if you'll notice, this rectangle tool, in the lower right corner, there's a little tiny triangle. If I click and hold the click on that triangle, I get other shapes that I can choose from, and one of them is the oval tool. So I'll select that. Now I can click and drag to create an oval. And I'm not great at making sure that's a perfect circle, but as I'm clicking and dragging, if I hold the Shift key, it will force that oval to be a perfect circle. Now it just so happens that the color of this ball is blue. And the reason it's blue is because that's the fill color that I had selected here, and also a stroke color of black. Now, if I had changed that to something else, like green, and the stroke color of pink, then the ball would have come in with a fill color of green and a stroke color of pink. If I now want to change the colors for the ball, I would have to switch back to the selection tool and then click and drag around the ball. That will get both the fill and the stroke colors. And then over here on the right, I could change that fill color to something else, and I could also change the stroke color to something else. Notice that I'm here in the Properties panel for the object. In my case, I want to keep it blue, so I've switched it back to blue. Now that I have the ball in place, I'm almost ready to animate it. But before I do, I need to convert it into a symbol. Now that might seem kind of strange. Isn't it already a symbol? I guess in a way it is, but I need to make that official with Adobe Animate. So I'm going to put down the oval tool and pick up the selection tool just by clicking here on the selection tool. Now I can click and drag around the circle to highlight both the circle and the stroke, the black stroke around the circle, and also the blue fill color. So I've highlighted all of that, selected all of it, and now I'm going to right click on it and choose Convert to Symbol here at the bottom of the menu. And when I click that, it gives me the option of naming this symbol, and I'll call it Ball 1. I'll click OK, and the ball changes very subtly, but it is now a symbol, and that means it's ready to be animated. And I want this ball to bounce maybe here, and then over here, and off screen. So how would I do that? Well, let's look down here on the timeline. Layer 1 is where the ball exists, and the timeline, you'll notice, has some numbers across it. These numbers are frames. So frame number 5 is here, frame number 20 is here, 25, 26, 35, etc. And this can go on and on and on for quite some time off to the right. In addition to these frames, I also have time. So above those frames, you'll see 1S, 2S, and if I browse here to the right, you'll find 16S and so on. Those are seconds. So 10 seconds, 15 seconds, etc. So I can look at this and just eyeball it and see that this project is set to have 24 frames per second approximately. That's how it's set up. Now there are different types of frames. Right now, these are just placeholders basically for frames. But I do have one existing frame. It's here, and it's gray, but it's got a black circle in it. That black circle indicates to me that this is a keyframe. And it's more complicated than this, but you can think of keyframes as being frames in which major changes happen. So this first frame is a keyframe because something major happened. The ball appears. That's the first time the ball exists in this project. So it's got a keyframe. I'm going to right-click on that keyframe, and I'm going to choose to create what's called a motion tween. I click on it, and immediately Adobe Animate gave me some additional frames. Now they're blank, but it also added a yellow color to those frames. Now why did it do that? It added the yellow color to indicate to me that a motion tween has been set up on this part of the layer. And why did it give me the extra frames? That's providing space for me, space in time really, for me to create an animation. So how do I actually create that animation? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this playhead, the blue vertical line, to wherever I want the ball to bounce. So maybe the 12th frame. This is at about the 1/2 second mark in my project. And then all I have to do is click on the ball, and you'll notice I did change the zoom level to 75%. You can adjust that if you need to, but it's going to be helpful for me to be at 75%, or maybe even smaller in my case. But with the playhead here on the 12th frame, I'm going to click and drag to move this ball where I want it to be at the 12th frame mark. And notice what happened when I did that. Because I set this up to be a motion tween, I get a path that appears in this turquoise blue color, and there's several stops in that path. You can see these little dots or small squares along the path. As I move the blue playhead back, you'll see the ball stopping at each of those dots. And that's why they call this a tween. everything in between my original keyframe here and the keyframe that was set up when I put the playhead there and then moved the shape that had a tween, everything between those 2 points has been animated or tweened. Next, I can move the playhead, let's say to frame number 24, and then I'll move this ball over here off screen to the right. And again, I get another path with another tween. I can test out my animation simply by moving that playhead back and forth. I can also click here to play my animation. It will return to the beginning and then play the animation. This is going great. Now at this point, I would like some words to appear. And in order to make this a little simpler and easier to do, I want to create a second layer. Right now I just have one layer. It's this ball that's bouncing. That all takes place on layer 1. But I'm going to click here on this plus sign to add another layer. In my case, it happened to name it layer 4 because I had played around with some other layers earlier. But for you, it'll probably be layer 2. And I'm going to put the playhead where I want it to be and where I want the ball to be when the words appear. So how about right there? Next, I'm going to add some text using this text tool. So I'm going to put down the selection tool and pick up the text tool just by clicking on the text tool button. Now I can click anywhere here on the canvas and I can type maybe something like nice bounce with an exclamation point. For you, the text might come in smaller. If this is your first time using Adobe Animate, the text probably came in very small. But you can highlight the text and use this panel here at the right. Make sure you're on Properties, Object, and then you can go down here to the size, and you can change the font to, let's say, 100 point font. I'll just tap Enter, and now the text is adjusted. Now, if I want to move this text box, I probably will need to switch back to this selection tool, and then I can click and drag to move it where I want it to be. Now at this point, let's pause and take a look at our timeline and our 2 layers. What do we have going on here? Layer 1 is yellow, indicating that a motion tween has happened, and I have 3 black dots on layer 1. Each of those indicates that a keyframe or an important change has happened at those points. And then the rest of this has just been tweened. The animation has automatically been put into place between those keyframes. What about my layer 4 for me, and that's probably layer 2 for you? I have a keyframe here in frame, what is that, 18 or 17? Why is there a keyframe there? Because that's when I put in my text. That's an important change, so it gets a keyframe. With the playhead over that keyframe, I think I want to move my text down underneath the screen or the canvas on which I'm working, and then I want to try to animate the text. Now, one thing you need to know about text is I could right-click on the text and I could convert it to a symbol, just like I did with the ball, but it's not necessary. For moving text, you don't really have to convert it to a symbol. So I'm going to right-click, this time on layer 4, somewhere after my keyframe or even on the keyframe, and then I'll choose Create Motion Tween, and then I'll make sure my playhead is where I want it to be, maybe there, and then I'll move the text where I want it to animate to. So I'll have it animate right up to the top. Let's try this out. Here's my animation. I'll click play, and it looks beautiful. Looks really good. Now, one thing that I'm noticing, this is all taking place in 1 second of duration. That's a little too fast for people to be able to read the text, I bet. So I'm going to move over here to the right of layer 4 in my case. And maybe I'll just browse over here to the right all the way to 60 frames, or maybe even, how about 75 frames? And I'll right click on layer 4 and I'll choose Insert Frame. Now, why is it Insert Frame and not Keyframe? The reason why is because I'm not adding any important change. There's nothing that's going to change about the nature of the text. All I want is for it to exist longer. So that's why I just added a frame instead of a keyframe. A keyframe would have worked, but it wouldn't have been necessary. Now I can click play to test it out. And if I want to, I could test it out in basically full screen by going up here to the upper right and clicking on this Test Movie button. This will open it in my web browser, and it will repeat it over and over, and I can see what my project is looking like. I'm going to X out of that and go back to my project. Whenever you do a test movie, it will often take you here to the Output tab. It looks like I have some warnings, but if I need to get back to the timeline, I can just click here on Timeline. Okay, I'm really happy with how this is going so far, but I want to just quickly point out to you that you're not limited just to what you can draw or create using the shape tool, using the line tool, and the brush tool, etc. Adobe Animate does give you the ability to go to File, Import, and then import an image or a graphic into your project. To show you this, I want to click the plus sign to get another layer, in my case, layer number 5. And let's say, maybe at this point here, I would like the UEN logo to appear on the screen. I have a copy of that UEN logo on my computer, so all I need to do is click on File, Import, Import to Stage. It's going to put it right here onto the stage, and I'll go to where my image is. In my case, it's in my Downloads folder. I'll click Open, and there's the UEN logo. I'm going to click up here on the selection tool and I'll move that down just to center it a little better. Now, if I want to animate this, I would need to right click on it, convert it to a symbol before I animate it. But in my case, I don't want to animate it. I just want it to appear and then exist for the rest of the project. So now you know how to add images into your animated projects in Adobe Animate. One other thing you need to be aware of, modern versions of Adobe Animate come with some assets that are built into it that just come with it. So here in this panel at the right, if you click on Assets, there are some animated assets that you can click and drag to bring into your project. They include characters and objects. And then there are also static characters and objects that you could bring in. And there are some sound clips. So it is possible also to drag sounds into your project and have them play at certain points. I'm going to undo adding the bird, but I just want you to see that that's available. And at this point, I think I'm ready to export this as a finished project. I could turn it in as my assignment for this course, or I could email it to someone. I could burn it to DVD-R if I want to, or upload it to YouTube. Let's look at how to do that. I'm going to click on this button here. This is the Quick Share and Publish button. I could do a social share to Twitter or YouTube. I'd have to put in my credentials from Twitter or YouTube in order to do that. Or I could publish it as a video on this computer. By default, it does select video MP4, and that's what I'm going to do in this case, and that's what I would suggest to you if you make a project in Adobe Animate. But if the video ends up being too big, you may also try publishing it as an animated GIF or as an HTML canvas. In other words, a web page. I'm going to stick with video and I'll click Publish. Now, when I do that, it's going to open up something called Adobe Media Encoder. Now, if you don't have Adobe Media Encoder already installed, you may need to install that. And then Adobe Media Encoder does its thing. It automatically exported this project as a video. Now, I should have saved my project with a name. I didn't do that, and so it's coming out as Untitled 1. That's okay. I'll just click OK, and then I'm going to go to the place where I downloaded it to. In Adobe Media Encoder, I have a location here set up for the output of the file. Now, if you don't, you may need to put that in. Also, if Adobe Media Encoder for any reason doesn't actually do the export for you, all you have to do is tap Enter on the keyboard or Return on the keyboard if you're using a Mac, and it should export the video. So now I'm going to go to where I downloaded my video. Here it is, Untitled 1, and I'm going to double click on it to open it up. I can click to make it go full screen, and I'll press play. There's my bouncing ball, my nice bounce text, and the UEN logo. So now I can X out of that, and if I want to, I can right click to rename my video, maybe to bouncing ball. I'll tap Enter. So now this is ready to be turned in or to be shared or uploaded to YouTube or whatever I want to do. So Adobe Animate is capable of so much more than what I've shown you in this video, but these are really all the basics you need to be able to start using Adobe Animate. You know how to create shapes now, at least some basic shapes. You know how to import images, graphics that are on your computer. You know how to convert them to symbols, move them around. You also know how to add text and move that text around. So I want to challenge you to think about the many different kinds of projects you could create for your students using Adobe Animate. You could create explanations, demonstrations, intro videos, all sorts of other things that are based on images and text. And then also, I hope you'll think about ways that your students might be able to use this, especially if you teach secondary, because secondary students in the state of Utah in public schools, including charter schools, should be able to access Adobe Animate along with most of the rest of Adobe Creative Cloud completely for free through the agreement that USBE and UEN have with Adobe. So think about those kinds of projects that you as the teacher could do and also ones that your students could do.